Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to Ramocro and welcome to the unexpected third part of my review of the 2022 annual meeting. The annual meeting of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, the elite event that happens once a year in the Jehovah's Witness World Headquarters, usually. I really wasn't expecting to make a part 3 to this particular rebuttal because, as you'll see if you watch part 2, I assumed I was reviewing the second half of the annual meeting based on the fact that all of my preparation and all of my production of the rebuttals was based on live streamed footage of the annual meeting due to a link that got shared. So I assumed I was commenting on the annual meeting in its entirety. What I could not have expected was that Jehovah's Witnesses were going to edit retroactively the annual meeting and insert a talk that never took place at the event itself. The event took place on October 1st, 2022. They've edited the video to make it look as though Kenneth Cook at this event gave a talk titled "The Earth That Will Endure Forever," when at the actual event, he did no such thing. So this is a talk that's been added retroactively. And to show you what I mean, here is the original streamed footage of the event at the part where Kenneth Cook's talk later gets inserted.
It's Jehovah's desire that people come to his house and be refreshed and educated. It is our prayer that this new and thrilling visitors center will accomplish that. Guests will come, they will be upbuilt, and they will draw closer to Jehovah God.
Now let's listen to our brother Mark Sanderson as he speaks to us on the subject, "Share It with the Generation to Come." Brother Sanderson.
At Matthew 13, verse 52,
So to be clear, we've just been watching the original streamed footage of the 2022 annual meeting of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania. Again, an elite event in the Jehovah's Witness calendar, kind of their Apple launch for any new initiatives or publications or new light teachings, new understandings of the scriptures. You'll have seen very clearly David Splain come to the lectern after this video featuring Paul Gillies, who's a governing body helper, and then introduce Mark Sanderson, and you actually see David Splain and Mark Sanderson change places on the podium. So David Splain exits the stage and Mark Sanderson walks onto the stage and speaks at the same lectern. That's the original unedited version of the annual meeting. That's what actually happened if you were in the audience at the annual meeting. But as I was explaining earlier in this rebuttal, what the organization has somehow thought was a good idea to do, they've decided it's a good idea to retroactively edit the event to include a talk by Ken Flodine, which, as we're going to see, is a bizarre, hateful, vitriolic talk that targets gay people. I'll just put the spoiler out there right to begin with. But let's first of all just dissect this bizarrely disingenuous way of retroactively changing what supposedly happened at a Jehovah's Witness event. This is how that same part of the meeting now appears on JW Broadcasting.
It's Jehovah's desire that people come to his house and be refreshed and educated. It is our prayer that this new and thrilling visitors center will accomplish that. Guests will come, they will be upbuilt, and they will draw closer to Jehovah God.
I'm sure we can hardly wait to go through that new visitor center. I know I can hardly wait. Now we're going to enjoy two talks on very encouraging themes. The first is by Brother Kenneth Cook. His subject, the earth that will endure forever. Brother Cook, please.
In the revelation presented to the Apostle John, Jesus pointed ahead many together. That is the earth that will endure forever.
We appreciated that encouragement very much. Thank you, Ken. Now, on another positive note, let's listen as our brother Mark Sanderson speaks to us on the subject, Share It with the Generation to Come. Mark, please.
At Matthew 13, verse 52, Jesus...
Now let's listen to our brother Mark Sanderson as he speaks to us on the subject, Share It with the Generation to Come. Brother Sanderson.
At Matthew 13, verse 52,
Isn't that bizarre? Why have they done that? So, obviously, to clarify, I've had to edit, just for the sake of time, like all of Kenneth Cook's talk out of this particular clip, just so you can see the way the talks were introduced. And I've repeated at the end the original footage so you can compare and contrast more quickly and easily. But unmistakably, what's happened is they've again doctored their own event and pretended that a talk was given at the annual meeting by Kenneth Cook titled The Earth That Will Endure Forever, when that actually didn't happen. I'm just flabbergasted that they've done this because I can't think of a logical reason for it. I try to put myself in their shoes, albeit that's quite difficult because who's to guess what deluded cult leaders have going through their befuddled minds at any given moment. But I try to imagine things from their perspective and reason as to why they would do this. And I honestly just come up empty, because if they want to have a talk, have Kenneth Cook give a talk that's bashing gay people, they can do that in a JW Broadcasting episode or in a governing body update or in a morning worship or in any number of ways. That if they absolutely need to get that message out there, they can easily do it. They have JW Broadcasting at their disposal. Why pretend to have had this talk in an event where the talk never took place? And especially, why do this when it's not like you can cover your tracks? Because again, the event was streamed. So there would have been thousands of people in attendance, both at the event itself and tied in at various other locations and watching via the stream link that I and others had. So every single one of this vast audience of thousands of people who watch the actual event live or have a recording of the event can easily see what's happened, and they're seeing David Splain doing this fake sequence where he is introducing a talk and adding comments about how much he can't wait to go and see this new visitor centre, adding all of that sort of stuff, talking to a pretend audience that isn't there because it's a pickup shot. It's being filmed after the fact in such a way as to look as though he's speaking in front of a live audience when he isn't. I'm just flabbergasted, viewers, that they've done it this way. I'm not surprised in the slightest that they need to spout anti-gay propaganda. They've been doing this for years. It's their favourite toy. They just cannot let go of this particular issue. And unfortunately, I think there'll be much more anti-LGBTQ plus material being pumped out by this organisation in the months and years ahead. But as to why they've done this and edit their own event, doctor their own event retroactively, I've got nothing.
In the revelation presented to the Apostle John, Jesus pointed ahead many centuries to the time when Jehovah brings an end to those who oppose his kingdom. At Revelation 11 and verse 18, it speaks of such opposers as those ruining the earth. In the Bible, the word earth can have more than one meaning. First, let's look at the planet. Unlike the planets that have been named after false gods, Genesis chapter 1 tells us that Jehovah named this planet Earth. As for the false labeling of the other planets, we can be certain that those disgusting names will soon be gone. But as for the earth, Jehovah leaves us in no doubt about its future. It was created to last forever. Just like the disgusting names of the false gods that humans have given to the literal planets, the false labeling of humankind and the immorality will not continue. For his own namesake, and for those who love him, Jehovah will bring to ruin those ruining the earth. What is the earth that is being ruined today? As we have discussed, it is the planet and the people being corrupted by Satan's world. But what is the earth that will endure forever? First, the planet. As we have read, the scriptures are clear that it will last forever. Next, and most important, the people, the new earth, those for whom Jesus died and who respond to the good news. The recreation is coming. Jesus will not waste a single day of the 1,000 years, not one day of it.
We've just been watching a few clips from Kenneth Cook's talk, The Earth That Will Endure Forever, a talk that wasn't given at the 2022 annual meeting, but for some reason Jehovah's Witnesses want us to believe that this was part of the programme. And this is just to give you the gist, essentially, of what Kenneth Cook's talk is about. He's talking about Revelation 11, verse 18. And you might be tempted to think that this is a new light talk. In other words, it's a talk where a governing body member is introducing a new understanding of Scripture. Because Revelation 11, verse 18, which talks about God bringing to ruin those ruining the earth, that was a favourite proof text that we used to use, I say we, that Jehovah's Witnesses used to use in the preaching work. They used to say, well, obviously, we're living in the last days because look at this creepy verse in Revelation 11, verse 18, that talks about men ruining the earth. At what other point in history has it even been possible for mankind to ruin the earth? The Romans couldn't ruin the earth. People in the Bronze Age couldn't ruin the earth. But nowadays, man can actually ruin the earth. Therefore, it must have been talking about the times that we're now living in. I've done some digging on this, and actually what Ken Cook has been saying here about the earth having not necessarily just a literal meaning regarding the planet Earth, but also a meaning regarding mankind. This isn't new. So you can actually find, going back a number of years, articles in the publications that talk about a dual meaning. So this whole reasoning about ruining the earth being like a really unique, almost uncanny verse pointing to the times that we're living in now, that's not, or that hasn't been supported in the organization's publications for some time now, actually. So it's not like this is even a new light talk. Well, it isn't a new light talk. This is not a new understanding. But for some reason, Jehovah's Witnesses, or specifically the governing body, really, really wanted to get this talk out there about God bringing to ruin those ruining the earth, both literally and figuratively in terms of the inhabitants of the earth. You'll have seen Ken Cook allude to morality, and the most obnoxious, grotesque part of his talk is to do with homosexuality and, as he puts it, blurring of the genders, which I will get to later in this rebuttal. That's the real, I'm not going to say highlight, because there's nothing that's a highlight about it. That's the part of the talk that is, let's say, most noteworthy. But how odd for Ken Cook to be going on this bizarre rant about the names of the planets being disgusting.
Genesis chapter 1 tells us that Jehovah named this planet Earth. As for the false labeling of the other planets, we can be certain that those disgusting names will soon be gone. Just like the disgusting names of the false gods that humans have given to the literal planets, the false labeling of humankind and the immorality will not continue.
So Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, etc., these are all false labeling or disgusting names because they're based on false gods. This is information that's really, really important, so important that they've had to shoehorn it into a recent event at which this talk was not given. This is what people need to be hearing today, apparently. This is what God's channel with mankind, this is the wisdom that God's channel with mankind, his faithful and discreet slave, needs to impart. That the names of the planets are disgusting because they're based on false gods, and one day they will be gone. The names will be gone? I don't think it's as simple as that, to be honest. I think once something has a name, I mean, it's possible to call something by a different name or dead name or whatever. You can introduce as many names as you want, but once a name has been used and it's in people's memory, the name is still there. You can't just erase it from history unless you're going to erase it from people's minds, which is, if you think about it, quite sinister. So I have problems with this whole idea of it just being gone, or the names of the planets being gone. But what a weird hill to die on, or what a weird problem to fixate over in such strong language. Because think about how this is going to be interpreted on an individual basis by Jehovah's Witnesses watching this material. Imagine you're a family watching this. And imagine you're one of the kids and you're going to school learning about the names of the planets, and now you're being told that these names are disgusting. So you might even feel guilty identifying in a school setting, if you're a Jehovah's Witness child or the child of a Jehovah's Witness, you might even feel guilty saying Jupiter or Saturn or Venus. You might feel guilty just using the correct names of the planets because they're suddenly now disgusting.
Rather than speaking of just the planet, the scriptures here link the ruining of all flesh or people with the ruining of the earth. Likewise, today, just as mankind is harming the actual planet, the world under Satan's control is also ruining all flesh. In both ways, the earth is being ruined. How so? Along with false religion, human society in general is gradually corrupting everything that Jehovah has set in place for mankind. We see it in their incessant nationalistic wars. We see it in their racial hatred and divisiveness. We see it in their promoting of abortion. We see it in their so-called gay marriage. We see it in the gender blurring that the world is promoting. You don't have to be a man or a woman, they say. You can be whatever you feel like or choose to be. Really? What does Jehovah say about that? At Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 5, he told the nation of Israel that, quote, "A woman must not put on the clothing of a man, nor should a man wear the clothing of a woman, for anyone doing so is detestable to Jehovah your God." If that is how the Creator feels about the switching of clothing, how much more detestable he must view the world's attempts to blur the lines of gender with false labeling. Recently, the World Health Organization adjusted its view of gender. It now states that, quote, "There are many genders existing on a spectrum from male to female." It added that gender identity exists on a continuum, and that sex is not limited to male or female. Again, really? Talk about an attempt to tear apart what Jehovah has made. So then even government agencies on a global scale are getting involved, and they are critical of anyone who does not adopt their warped view.
Wow. Well, Kenneth Cook would know all about organizations who are critical of anyone who doesn't adopt their warped view. Isn't that exactly what the governing body does, or the Jehovah's Witness organization does, when it comes to criticism of its warped teachings and practices? Teachings and practices and policies that damage people and tear apart families. They get to criticize people who are whistleblowers to their abuse. But if anyone voices an opinion that they don't agree with, suddenly it's wrong. And where do I even begin with the utter nonsense, let's just say it, verbal diarrhea that Kenneth Cook has just come out with? He was normally the quiet one. He was normally the dull one. I mean, if there's a convention program or an annual meeting and Kenneth Cook appears at the lectern, typically I would, well, not completely zone out. I'd still want to listen to what he has to say, but I wouldn't be expecting anything quite like this. This is more the sort of talk that Tony Morris would have given when he was a governing body member, or perhaps Stephen Lett, or perhaps David Splain. I didn't have Kenneth Cook down as being capable of this sort of talk. Let's start off with abortion.
Human society in general is gradually corrupting everything that Jehovah has set in place for mankind. We see it in their incessant nationalistic wars. We see it in their racial hatred and divisiveness. We see it in their promoting of abortion.
The promoting of abortion. So abortion is something that is promoted. This is what we would call a straw man argument. So Kenneth Cook is manufacturing a caricature of a position to make it easier to present a case against it. As far as I'm aware, very few people, if anyone, are actually promoting abortion. In other words, going out and saying, hey, you should all get abortions. Why don't you get pregnant just so you can have an abortion? Because having an abortion's great. I'm sure there's always going to be a very small minority of sadists who would say that sort of thing and, have mental issues, quite frankly, when it comes to, the idea of getting pregnant just to have an abortion. Never write anything off when it comes to the capacity for human evil and perversion. But that's not really what we're seeing in terms of the way or the approach that society takes to abortion, which is to say, let the woman choose if there is a situation in which the woman is unable, for whatever reason, to carry a baby to full term. That's the position of society. It's a position of allowing women the choice to have an abortion if they so choose. You can agree or disagree with that. That's probably for a whole other video, which, quite frankly, I don't have the mental capacity to make right now. But surely we can all agree that Kenneth Cook's words and the reality of the situation are two very different things. It's one thing to promote abortion. It's another thing to promote a woman's right to an abortion if the woman feels, for whatever reason, that that terrible decision needs to be made. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we have Kenneth Cook's bizarre attack on the transgender community.
We see it in the gender blurring that the world is promoting. You don't have to be a man or a woman, they say. You can be whatever you feel like or choose to be. Really? What does Jehovah say about that? At Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 5, he told the nation of Israel that, quote, a woman must not put on the clothing of a man, nor should a man wear the clothing of a woman, for anyone doing so is detestable to Jehovah your God.
So Kenneth Cook, governing body member, part of God's channel of communication with mankind, has a problem with trans people because, number one, really? That's apparently a mature way of approaching this incredibly sensitive topic, to just dismiss it as gender blurring, or however he puts it, and respond by saying, really? That to me does not speak of any sort of wisdom or any sort of thoughtfulness in approaching this subject. If you're just going to say, really, you're not really interested in persuading people. You are speaking to an echo chamber. You are aware that the majority of people hearing your words already agree with you, and you're therefore just saying, really, as if to anticipate the fact that your audience already agrees with you. So that was very, very tedious. And then he quotes Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, about men putting on the clothing of women or women putting on the clothing of men, and saying that this is detestable. This is really the best Kenneth Cook has got when it comes to slamming the idea of people switching gender. This is his best argument that he can reach for. And obviously that verse doesn't talk about changing your gender biologically, it's just talking about clothing. But he uses the old slippery slope fallacy of, well, how much more so? If it's talking about clothing, then how much more so would God view it as detestable for genders to be blurred by false labeling or whatever, or I guess by extension by males becoming females or females becoming males. I think it's worth just pondering on this if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you find this, again, frankly, juvenile reasoning persuasive. Let's just pause on this verse in Deuteronomy 22, verse 5. A woman must not put on the clothing of a man, nor should a man wear the clothing of a woman, for anyone doing so is detestable to Jehovah your God. That's the verse upon which Kenneth Cook is hanging his argument against trans people. That's the verse. For me, this is a classic example of the Jehovah's Witness obsession with sex. When it comes to sex and rules about sex and forms of sex or sexuality that are agreeable or disagreeable, this is an organization that has written mountains of material telling people what sexuality they're allowed to have, to whom they're allowed to be attracted, with whom they're allowed to have sex. You can only have sex with fellow believers to whom you're married, essentially, and certainly not fellow believers who are of the same gender. So you have to be heterosexual. You have to marry only in the Lord. You have to only be married, in other words, even if you're both consenting adults, it's not okay to have sex. You have rule after rule after rule after rule. And recently we had a talk by David Splain in which he layered on a whole bunch of other rules to do with sex. Thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious. It's a sex-obsessed organization. And as I've mentioned before, what happens if we compare their approach to sex with their approach to other things that are denounced in the Bible unequivocally, but which get hardly any denunciation or hardly any condemnation in the literature or in the guidance to elders, comparatively speaking. One great example is stealing or theft. I'm going to rattle off now, with Tibor's help, 6 Bible verses that condemn stealing. And you'll see where I'm going with this, hopefully. So Exodus 20, verse 15, you must not steal. Exodus 22, verse 7, if a man gives his fellow man money or articles to keep, and these are stolen from the fellow man's house, if the thief is found, he must make double compensation. Leviticus 19, verse 11, you must not steal, you must not deceive, and you must not deal falsely with one another. Mark 10, verse 19, you know the commandments, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and your mother. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 10, thieves, greedy people, drunkards, revilers, and extortioners will not inherit God's kingdom. Ephesians 4, verse 28, let the one who steals steal no more, rather let him do hard work, doing good work with his hands, so that he may have something to share with someone in need. So I've just read, in quick fire fashion, 6 Bible verses, all unequivocally condemning stealing. Kenneth Cook's given us one verse about not dressing in the opposite gender's clothing to denounce trans people as detestable. When we look in the Shepherd book, the book Shepherd the Flock of God, which is like a secret elders-only manual, we get pages and pages and pages about porneia and all of the various ways that you can commit sexual immorality, including by being gay. So there's mountains of material going into the nuances of what sort of sex or what sort of sexuality or what sort of pornography is permissible or unpermissible. Spoiler alert, if it's gay porn or lesbian porn, it's abhorrent. If it's heterosexual porn, you're still going to get a talking to, but at least it's not abhorrent, so it's not as bad. This is the detail that this book goes into when it comes to sex. Let's see what it says about stealing, shall we? Chapter 12, point 21, stealing, thievery. Though all stealing is wrong, the body of elders should use discernment in weighing the circumstances and the extent of the involvement in wrongdoing to determine whether it is a judicial matter. That was it. I'm not kind of missing out material. There's one sentence in the whole book about stealing, and it's, I think you will agree, neither here nor there. It's quite wishy-washy. Well, what are the circumstances? What happens if we replace stealing with cross-dressing, which is what Deuteronomy 22 verse 5 says? Let's take the same sentence. Though all cross-dressing is wrong, detestable, the body of elders should use discernment in weighing the circumstances and the extent of the involvement in wrongdoing to determine whether it is a judicial matter. I don't think you're going to find that anytime soon, are you? You're not going to find a wishy-washy, well, what are the circumstances approach to cross-dressing or switching gender, biologically or otherwise, identifying as another sex. It's always going to be black and white, judgmental, fire and brimstone. How dare you decide for yourself what your gender is, what your sexuality is, with which consenting adults you have sex? How dare you? How detestable it would be for you to make the wrong choice in those areas. Stealing, well, depends on the circumstances. Then we have Kenneth Cook's bizarre rant about the World Health Organization.
Recently, the World Health Organization adjusted its view of gender. It now states that, quote, there are many genders existing on a spectrum from male to female. It added that gender identity exists on a continuum and that sex is not limited to male or female. Again, really? Talk about an attempt to tear apart what Jehovah has made.
I don't have too much to say on this other than the obvious, namely that I will always side with the World Health Organization and the many experts who work with said organization over the incoherent, judgmental ramblings of Kenneth Cook and his colleagues any day of the week. But it's worth just noticing that there's a double standard here. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, maybe you agree with Kenneth Cook's approach to trans people, with his hateful, vile, homophobic stance. Maybe you're down with that. And let's be honest, you don't need to be a Jehovah's Witness to hate gay people or hate trans people. That's unfortunately quite a common thing nowadays. If anything, it seems that in this talk, Kenneth Cook is sort of jumping on the bandwagon. I would be interested to know whether he would have given this talk if there weren't such a strong populist groundswell against trans people anyway, with, notable figures writing material or saying things that encourage an environment in which trans people are, let's just say it, eradicated or have limited access to healthcare, or where laws are passed making it impossible to transition from one gender to another. I think Kenneth Cook is sort of, again, jumping on the bandwagon and thinking, yeah, well, whereas if I go on about gay people, that's going to be almost universally objectionable for anyone who has an ounce of compassion or sympathy. When it comes to the issue of trans people, there's a bit more controversy here, and I think we can afford to make a name for ourselves by taking a side, by picking a side that's going to be not quite so controversial, because lots of people who aren't even religious feel the same way as we do about trans people. Anyway, I digress. He's talking here about the World Health Organization, and he is essentially dismissing a given issue that he's talking about. All I would say is, if you are a Jehovah's Witness, even if you agree with him on this, go on Watchtower Online Library and type in brackets, World Health Organization. So in the search bar, make sure there are quotation marks, World Health Organization, and see how many times Jehovah's Witnesses in their publications cite the World Health Organization as a reliable, reputable source in making their arguments. You're going to get 5 pages. 5 pages of results showing Jehovah's Witnesses quoting from the World Health Organization when it suits them. When the World Health Organization says something that sounds a little bit apocalyptic about a certain pathogen or whatever, that sort of thing. So when it suits the governing body, they'll throw their weight behind the World Health Organization. But the moment the World Health Organization says something that they disagree with on an issue involving sex, suddenly the World Health Organization's word means nothing.
And going back to marriage, Jehovah instituted the arrangement to be a permanent bond between a man and a woman. At Matthew 19, verses 4 and 5, we read how Jesus emphasized this while he was on the earth. Quoting from Genesis 2:24, he said this, "Have you not read that the one who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and will stick to his wife, and the two will be one flesh'?" He made them male and female, and the two will be one flesh. Jehovah's purpose for humans is clear, but Satan's world now says that marriage can be between 2 men or 2 women. Again, really? We can be certain that promoting this corrupt view is part of Satan's attempt to ruin mankind, to make them so abhorrent to Jehovah that he would abandon humans and his purpose for mankind in the earth. But that will never happen. God's purpose for mankind and their home will be fulfilled.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that's the worst of it. This is as bad as it gets in Kenneth Cook's disgusting talk, "The Earth That Will Endure Forever." A parting shot there at gay people in general and the concept of gay marriage, and Kenneth Cook invoking Adam and Eve. His argument amounts to, well, in the beginning, it was Adam and Eve. It wasn't Adam and Steve. That's essentially his argument. That's how simplistic and childlike God's mouthpiece or God's channel is. To simply say, well, does it make sense biologically? Is this what we see in the Garden of Eden? No. So how on earth can you have gay marriage? To think we used to look up to people like Kenneth Cook, I say we, Jehovah's Witnesses and former Jehovah's Witnesses, we used to think that this was cutting-edge thinking. This was really profound wisdom and thoughtfulness to be making these sorts of arguments. But what you find is, if you have any sort of awareness of what people in other or leaders in other fundamentalist Christian groups are saying, what you notice is this is what they're all saying. They're all making these sorts of arguments, all of which completely overlook the glaringly obvious fact that sexuality is something that is part of you, and it's something that you're born with. People don't choose to be gay. They just are. They are more attracted to the same gender than they are to the opposite gender. In some cases, not remotely attracted to the opposite gender and only attracted to the same gender. And we can say the same thing when it comes to trans people. There is such a thing as gender dysphoria. In fact, there's an entire page on the NHS website. For those of you in America, NHS stands for National Health Service. This is essentially a government website talking about reliable sources, with an overview. Maybe Tibor can show, if he's gracious, the page. Gender dysphoria is a term that describes a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. This sense of unease or dissatisfaction may be so intense it can lead to depression and anxiety and have a harmful impact on life. It's a real thing where people, for whatever reason, are not comfortable in their bodies when it comes to their gender. And while biologically transitioning isn't always going to be the answer, in many cases it is. And the hatred and vitriol that's directed against people who grapple with this and who find a solution that works for them and just makes it possible to enjoy our fleeting existence on this planet, the hatred and vitriol that's leveled at them is just appalling. We're talking about people just finding a way of being happy, finding a way of getting through life with all of its struggles and all of its complexities. And in this case, getting through life with an issue that they are, again, born with. So if you want to argue that God views being gay as detestable or being a trans person as detestable, you have to explain why people have gender dysphoria to begin with, or how it can be that people are, just purely by observation, clearly born gay, lesbian, straight, bisexual, you name it. A variety of different sexualities are present in humankind. Whose fault's that? Why is God creating people with gender dysphoria or creating people with an attraction to the same gender and then labeling them as detestable for doing something about it?
Since Jehovah gave his Son to save faithful humans and to restore his purpose, our next question is, when will it happen? When will Jehovah bring to ruin those ruining the earth? Well, the answer to that question is soon. very soon. The ruining of mankind and their home will not be allowed to go on. Let no one be mistaken about it. Jehovah is resolved. He is patient. He does not desire any to be destroyed, but he is determined. His day is coming.
Well, that narrows it down, doesn't it? Gosh, it's just beyond a joke at this point, isn't it? So if you were wondering, viewers, if it was just in the back of your mind, wonder when Armageddon's coming. Wonder when that thing that Jehovah's Witnesses have been predicting for 140 plus years, wonder when that's going to come about. Seems like it should have been here by now. Kenneth Cook has reassured us that it's coming soon, very soon. Oh, okay. So basically, you're telling us exactly the same thing that Jehovah's Witnesses have been saying for over 100 years. Just a vague soon, very soon. What a charlatan. I mean, again, I have to wonder how on earth I fell for this for so long when I was a Jehovah's Witness. Of course, religious hucksters and snake oil salesmen are going to come up with vague language when it comes to things they don't have a clue about, things where it suits them to lead people along, but they don't want to be held accountable. Of course, they're going to keep it vague. They're never going to, or in very rare instances, are they going to say, oh yeah, it'll be in 3 months. You want to watch out on March the 3rd, 2025. That's when things are really going to go down. They have tried it in the past. You know, you can find examples in Jehovah's Witness publications in the history of the organization of where they went one step further and identified 1925 or 1975 as being actual years when it might be reasonably expected that Armageddon might come. Obviously, the current leadership has learned from those mistakes by and large and try to be, or are, far more vague. But make no mistake, this is disingenuous. This is vague wording that's being used purely to string people along with false hope and false expectations about an end of the world that's never coming. Anyway, that's all I have for you. That's hopefully all I have to say about the 2022 annual meeting. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? We've learned that this organization will doctor their own events and their own meetings, even annual meetings, even these prestigious, elite, top brass events that people can remember attending, and they can remember the order in which the talks were given. We've learned that the organization has no qualms about just doctoring these events after the fact to insert entire talks. So goodness knows how many parts there will be to my rebuttal to the 2022 annual meeting. Maybe there'll be a part 4 and a part 5 and a part 6. Maybe they'll find another talk that was mysteriously given without anyone noticing. Good grief. So I guess I should just leave this open-ended. Stay tuned, viewers, just in case there's something else God's channel forgot to mention at this event. But hopefully that's all I have to say about this particular event, at least for now. Don't forget that you can watch similar videos and similar rebuttals right here on the Lloyd Evans channel, so please do consider subscribing. But that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for watching.